Hello, and welcome back to Stupid Things People Do and What We Can Learn from Them. Last week, we discovered investigative frameworks and how you need to define pretty much everything in order to avoid tragic mistakes. Today, we're going to make believe that we've done everything correctly up to this point and talk about the actual process of investigating. As a reminder, this is Stupid Things People Do, not intelligent legal advice, though I do run this stuff by our intelligent Teleos law attorneys occasionally. By occasionally, I mean every time. And so, while we discuss some great things you should be thinking about, this is no substitute for legal counsel and talking to experts. Right. So, conducting investigations. By necessity, this is going to be a little bit different this time around because we're talking about the right things to do. And frankly, most of our stupid things examples have gone far off the rails by now. Like, I think the last time we had a good example of how to investigate, we had misbehavior in China. And that was the Communist Party investigating, and I'm not going to use them as an example of best behavior. So, getting right into it. Interviews. Easy questions only. There's an allegation of misconduct. So, who should you interview first? Now, if you said the complaining witness, you would be absolutely correct. But isn't that gossip and slander? Say, Sally says Bob set fire to the entire men's gospel choir. Surely the solution is not to talk with Sally about how Bob has gone pyro, but to go and confront Bob in a godly way to get to the bottom of this fire-fueled friar fest. Yeah, Matthew 18 is great, but maybe not for criminal allegations, pyromaniacs, or potential harassment claims. You see, before you go talking to Bob about fuegophilia, you need context, and you need a sense of who else you're going to need to talk to. And there's really only one way to get that context, which is talk to the complaining witness. This is going to let you know what to talk with the alleged offender about, and it's going to let you know who else might need to be interviewed. You know, like the remains of the men's gospel choir. Oh, by the way, at this point in the script writing process, the lawyers butted in here and said that if half the men's gospel choir has been incinerated, you need to make a crime report, and law enforcement may take over your investigation. They're quite on fire about that. But let's continue our little hypothetical for the moment. If Bob didn't really set the men's gospel choir on fire, Bob might bristle at those allegations that he did. Then again, if Bob really did engage in some Burning Man level activities, Bob might bristle anyways. Fortunately, you're not relying on Bob for the details of the story. That is why you talk to Sally first. And then you're going to interview some other people too. For Bob's specific interview, you can ask open-ended questions. Let Bob tell you his side of the story. Usually, when a person learns they've been accused of ecclesiastical immolation, they'll want to explain themselves. And that the case, explain themselves they will. However, sometimes the accused might be so offended by the allegation that they might refuse to cooperate. They may even resign rather than have to participate in an investigation that impugns their character. Now, if we think creatively, I'm sure we can come up with a whole laundry list of Geneva Convention violating best practices to elicit confessions from uncooperative prisoners, employees. But this is an investigation, not an interrogation. And we are employers, not Bond villains. So I've been told. So if the accused doesn't want to be interviewed, we can't really force them to be. But this brings us really, really quick all the way back to frameworks. All of that pre-planning we talked about last session. As part of your policy, you can mandate that an employee has to cooperate with an investigation. And in the US at least, that's a basic principle. And if they quit in the face of an investigation, your policy can define that as a retroactive termination. Basically, you're imposing defined consequences in your policy if someone fails to cooperate with an investigation. AKA, for this part, you need to plan ahead. Now, a quick word of caution. Be very wary about enforcing such policies on a complaining witness. If you enforce mandatory cooperation policies on a complaining witness for an investigation into misconduct that they reported, you could get in trouble for retaliating. This is particularly the case if the conduct you are investigating is related to a federal law, such as sexual or racial misconduct. Having mandatory cooperation policies gives you the tools to compel cooperation from the accused, but that does not mean you should compel compliance from a complaining witness. Some compassion and some discretion can go a really long way in these situations. Speaking of compassion and discretion, What do you do if the complaining witness wants to keep things confidential? Fear of retaliation is a real thing. So say Sally says Bob set fire to the gospel choir, but she really doesn't want you to tell anyone. What should you do? Well, first of all, wow, no, you can't not tell anyone that an entire choir got immolated. That's some serious allegations. And so is racial discrimination or sexual harassment. That's why I use the Burning Man analogy. These problems simply cannot stay between you and me. But say she says, okay, fine, you can tell Bob and people about it, but just don't tell Bob I was the one who told you. That's a nice thought. But, I mean, how do you know? Sally told me. That's a likely thing to come up. And while you can try to honor confidentiality, you should not promise it, because that's a promise you might not be able to keep. Also, just a weird law thing, blanket requirements for confidentiality have been held to violate the National Labor Relations Act. So having policies and promises that investigations should remain confidential, that can actually be a serious legal problem. Now, that's not even to mention, how can you enforce confidentiality with people who are not employees or who are no longer members? So, for example, you might tell only a few people involved in the investigation about the allegations. But what about when they leave your organization? Maybe their cat dies. Maybe they go and they seek counseling for that. Maybe they confess everything from the past 30 years to said counselor. And maybe that counselor was secretly a reporter for BuzzFeed. You don't know. We live in a post-2020 world. Anything could happen. So, pulling it all together, this insanity goes to say you should be compassionate and you need to show discretion. You can try to honor confidentiality, but you cannot promise to do so. And you shouldn't immortalize in policy any confidentiality requirements concerning investigations. You will need to be prepared in advance for how to handle uncooperative witnesses, particularly if they're the accused. But you need to be gentle about how you handle complaining witnesses. They will have more leeway to refuse to participate than the accused will. Finally, regarding interviews, interview the complaining witness first, and then determine who else will need to be interviewed. When interviewing the accused, it's their opportunity to tell their side of the story. The interview will need to be open-ended to allow them to do that. Now, I know this is a lot to keep track of, and if you don't have someone who is an absolute expert on conducting investigations, you may need to look for outside help. If you don't know where to start looking, talk to legal counsel. As always, that is a great place to start. This is David Sidebotham, signing off.